Our speaker today is a graduate of the University of Toronto and holds a master's in landscape architecture with a minor in ecology from Penn State. She is currently Director of Design at Roof Meadows Landscape Design.
Is there a microphone?
Carrying it all.
Microphone?
Tim, we need the mic.
Yeah. Like they can't hear back
You
there.
want to read it?
I'll read it.
Okay.
I have a rocket.
See if I can hear it. Okay.
Laura Hansplant, our speaker today, is a graduate of the University of Toronto. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. And holds a master's in landscape architecture with a minor in ecology from Penn State. She is currently Director of Design at Roof Meadows Landscape Design. This company is well known in Philadelphia for its ecologically sensitive landscapes and roof meadows, both in the public sphere as at the University of Pennsylvania and the Philadelphia Zoo, and in the corporate world. Prior to that, Laura worked for 15 years for Andropoga Associates, designing sustainable landscapes. Her projects included those at Sitwell Friends and the Phipps Conservatory. These landscapes integrate social areas, rainwater systems, and plant communities to create spaces where each element serves to mutually support the whole site. Laura is herself a gardener who specializes in native plants, studying their character and durability. Laura has developed workshops on planning design, sustainable planning, and the sites rating system for regional and national audiences, and can't wait for you to come to her workshops. I put that in. We are delighted to welcome her to Beaumont.
Thank you so much. I'm pretty good at talking loud, but if you can't hear me, just flag me from the back and I'll raise the volume a little bit. I'm really happy to be here today. Anne asked me to come to talk about ideas and thoughtful suggestions for how to integrate native plants and native plant communities into what I think of as the cultural landscape, which is the places that we are every day. The places where we live, the places where we have the highest expectations, I think, and which are very much influenced by our traditions. This is a question that I have spent most of my career asking and exploring because it's something that's very dear to our hearts. How to help our landscapes be healthy, be environmentally friendly, but at the same time also continue to be beautiful, places that we're proud of. And we need to do both. That is the key. So I'm going to start by showing you some pictures of different places around here who are exploring the same question and are doing it well. This first place is the Morris Arboretum. How many people have been to Morris Arboretum? All of you. So you should be really familiar with the entry drive. And as you may remember, that drive goes through a very broad lawn, which incorporates meadow, in this case, into it here and here, in thin little ribbons. And I really admire the Morris Arboretum because I think they balance that design very well. This is Penn State Brandywine's campus. They are doing this, exploring the same question in a slightly different way. Here you can see they've got a lot of lawn, big campus green, and in the low areas they've allowed the grass to grow longer in a kind of a sculptural way that follows the line of what becomes a stream. City of Portland, in a very different way, is looking at how to integrate small rain gardens, small planting areas that use native plants to improve water quality and filter rainwater that flows off the streets. And they do this in very tiny areas between the curb and the sidewalk and the street. And it has to be beautiful because it's part of their streetscape. It's the places visitors and residents see every day. University of Pennsylvania and other colleges are incorporating rain gardens into the edges of their campus green spaces. This is Shoemaker Green at the University of Pennsylvania, right near the hospital and the Palestra. And this is the campus green. Kids hang out,
See, that's what
throw
they-
frisbee, big events spill out here. And then in the spaces between the paths, they've developed these rain gardens that use native plants. It's a garden space that also addresses water quality. On a different note, this is the High Line in New York. Has anybody been to the High Line? Know someone's been to the High Line? This is an elevated walk. It's on an old railroad trestle, and it's been developed as a linear park that has an ample place to park, places to sit, and it incorporates native plants. It's beautiful, it's different, it's actually hugely popular. If you go on a weekend, this walkway is packed. In Philadelphia, Sister Cities Park, this is, I guess, very emblematic of what Philadelphia is starting to do through its public spaces. Look at how to integrate, in this case, ornamental grasses and a green roof on the edge of a cafe and the edge of an open park space, a very traditional park space. So before I talk about how to do it well, I want to talk really briefly about why it matters. Why does my backyard matter? My backyard, your backyard at Belmont, other properties in this area. How many people grew up in the country? Anybody? How many people grew up in the city? How many people grew up in a suburb? I grew up in a suburb. Yeah, all right. How many people, when they were young or maybe now, used to fish or went fishing? Maybe with parents? I did. I went with my grandfather. How many people like to bird? Anybody like to bird or have a backyard bird feeder? How many people love seafood? Like my hand goes way up on the seafood question. So, how many people when they were little remember catching butterflies and putting the caterpillars in a jar? Maybe watching the chrysalis develop? Yeah, I did that. So, the reason it matters is because our ability to do just those activities comes out of how we shape and how we are stewards of our backyards and our landscapes. And our backyard design can influence that. And it influences also, I'm going to give you 3 broad examples. The first, and this is sort of a dramatic picture with the geese in the pond. The first is that the water that comes off of our yards is the source of the water that's in our streams and ponds. And in less developed landscapes, in rural landscapes, that rainfall goes down into the soil, it works its way through the deep soil, and it ends up on our streams very slowly and gradually, and the soil filters and cleans that water. The water that comes from springs usually is very good cold water. When you have a suburb or a developed landscape like the one that I grew up in, more and more of that water doesn't make it into the soil, but it runs off the surface of the lawn, off our pavements, off our roads, and it goes straight into the water, into the streams and ponds very quickly. And when it does that, it picks up material that it encounters along the way. So sediment, fertilizer, goose poop, pet waste if people don't pick it up, anything like that ends up in our ponds. And as you probably have already seen from places that you are familiar with in the neighborhood, then you see the consequence here. You might see more algae blooms. You will find that if you like to fish, there might be fewer native trout, and you rely on the stocking truck from the state to come and stock the trout before you go fishing. The quality of this water affects whether or not we have local fish. It affects whether or not we get algae. And furthermore, in the bigger picture, as it flows downstream, it affects the large rivers that are part of our landscape, whether that's the Chesapeake Bay, the Delaware River, the Schuylkill River. All of our drinking water comes from rivers in this area, unless you happen to be on a well system, which I don't think anybody is anymore around here. So when I lived in Philadelphia, I now live out near Willow Grove, but when I lived in Philadelphia, the water that came out of my tap came from the Schuylkill River, and the water that fell in my yard flowed down into the Wissahickon Creek, which met the Schuylkill River just upstream of where the intake pipe was for the water treatment plant. So what we do all matters. On another note, birds and butterflies rely on the plants they find in our landscapes, in our backyards. And so as we have the more development in our counties, as we have more and more houses, more people, more suburbs, there are fewer places for birds and butterflies, insects to find the food they eat. And unfortunately, caterpillars, butterfly larvae, they can't eat just any plant. They have evolved specifically to eat certain kinds of native plants. That's their food source that they rely on. And as those food sources disappear, then the butterflies that we see in our landscape or are used to seeing disappear, and the birds that eat those same insects may decline. So I remember when I was a child, I could find monarchs anywhere. Monarchs were a common sight in my neighborhood, in my suburb. They're not anymore. I don't think my children have seen a monarch for real, except out of a book. They see butterflies, they don't see monarchs. That's because monarchs rely on, and partly, one of their big food sources is milkweed. Milkweed's disappearing from our landscapes as we make more lawn, as we have more housing developments, and as agricultural practices change. They're using more chemicals to manage their crops, and the wildflowers that you used to see along the edges of fields are less and less available and present. So, Doug Tallowmead, if anybody's read I think his book is Bringing Nature Home. If anybody's read Doug Tallowmead, he did a study of native plants to see how many native trees, to see how many insects, butterfly larvae, birds they supported. And an oak tree might support 100 different species of insects, including butterflies. A non-native tree might support only a handful, so the difference is enormous. The more we can incorporate native plants into our landscapes, the more likely it is that our kids and our grandkids will be able to have the experiences we had growing up. And the third point is flood control. This is a picture from Haverford College, which, if you're familiar, if anybody goes walking there on the weekend, I think their campus is open, they have a pond, they have an arboretum, and the interesting story I heard, we worked with them a few years back, is about their pinetum. Their pinetum is a pine tree collection, a conifer collection on an open lawn that is sandwiched between the athletic fields upslope and a busy street. And what would happen is that when it rained, water from the athletic fields would run down over the lawn of the pinetum, and the street would flood if it was a big rainfall. And at some point, the groundskeeper said, I'm going to let the grass grow long in the pinetum because it's hard for me to maintain it all, and I think this is a good thing to do. And so he let the grass grow long. And coincidentally, seemingly, the flooding on the street downslope stopped. Now, the administrators of the college said, we're not so sure we like to have all this long grass. It doesn't look right to us. This isn't how we think about our college. And they had him mow it down to short grass again. And the flooding problems on the street downslope started again. So what we talked to them about was how do we incorporate taller grasses, native plants in your pinetum so we can solve a flooding problem, maybe make your maintenance easier, but do it in a way which is still beautiful. So I think there are two lessons out of that for me. One is that what we do does matter. Sometimes you can see that effect very dramatically in the neighboring properties, and how we do it matters. How we do it matters. And so this sketch was meant to illustrate a few design principles. One, about having very cleanly maintained edges, about incorporating, this was part of a jogging trail on their campus, and then how to make the natural vegetation beautiful, incorporating wildflowers, keeping it at a specific height that people were comfortable with, screening where we needed to for the neighbors, ideas about how to accomplish several goals in a way that they could maintain, but that was also healthy for the environment. So how do we do this? This is the question for me, because it can't be weedy, it can't look messy, it should be beautiful. And we can do that and accomplish the environmental goals we might have for ourselves. So the first I've got 3 or 4 principles here. The first one is about gradient. And this is an example from Mount Cuba. How many people have been to Mount Cuba? You have a chance? It's a beautiful estate. If you have a chance for a road trip, I definitely recommend it. It's an estate in Hockessin, Delaware. It's just north of Wilmington. And you can see this is the large estate house, and they have large sweeping lawns. They have some beautiful back terraces, which are a lovely garden setting. And then as you move through the estate, down slope, they have a pond, they have woods. You can see that the edge of the pond is well maintained, and then on the slope, they've allowed their grass to grow longer. They have meadow and paths. And so for Mount Cuba, it's about how do we pick the places that we let be more natural, and how do we juxtapose them side by side with places that are more groomed, that might offer places to sit, that might offer lovely walking paths through the property, and that set up some really pretty views that can change through the seasons. Here's another view of it a little later in the season when the grass on the slope is allowed to grow taller, and if you walk past these seats, you can follow the paths through that area. Here's another one. This is the second principle, is about proportion. Many property owners that I work with say, yeah, I'd like to incorporate native plant communities, I'm going to do it everywhere. And I say, no, please, don't do it everywhere. You want to have balance. And this is actually in Melbourne, Australia, and I love this picture because you can see they've got rain gardens. The water that comes off the grass moves into this taller planting, which soaks up that water and cleans it, helps it move in a more sustainable, healthy way through the landscape. But then they also still have their lawn, and you can walk along the path and enjoy the park, and this rain garden fits very neatly into that landscape. It's still beautiful. There are faculty, the person that comes to mind is Joan Nassauer. She's done studies about how people perceive natural landscapes, natural planting when it's set into a park-like setting or a residential setting, and she found that keeping grass in some proportion is good because it helps the place look cared for, and people recognize that this is intentional and not just somebody being lazy with the mower. Here's another one. What I love about this is the real control of the textures. You see the lawn, it's about proportion. They've kept lawn, open place, and this is a residential setting to play, to use. And along the edge of the path, they've allowed these perennial borders to be more meadow-like, to be more evocative of a natural native plant community with the ornamental grasses and the very thin use of the wildflowers. That's not accidental, that's a very intentional design, very carefully proportioned. This is at the University of Pennsylvania. Here they've allowed the grass to grow longer. This is an intentional seed mix. This is the sports fields. This is at the University of Pennsylvania at their new Penn Park near the Delaware River. The next principle is about the importance of edges. Here at the Morris Arboretum, they mow this lawn. It's very carefully mowed, very cleanly kept, and there's actually not that much meadow. It's very thin ribbons carefully placed in that landscape. And what's important is that these edges look nice and neatly maintained. If this were a messy edge, you would perceive the landscape in a very different way. Here's a close-up of that same area at Morris. This is in early spring. The daffodils aren't quite blooming yet, but this is the edge of one of those meadow ribbons. It's clipped short. Here's their lawn, their long-term lawn, and here the grass is a little longer again along the stream. And this is very carefully balanced to look neat, but to incorporate both lawn and native planting. Here the same area is a little later. You can see that the native grasses are a little taller, but again, they're in a very deliberate, intentional area. Here they've started a new grove of trees and a very neat, clean edge. Here it is later in the year. You can see they don't let this, they control the height of this. They set it to about this high, which is what they want. And then there's plenty of lawn. We're gonna come back to this particular image, but the proportion is neatly balanced and the edges are neatly maintained. The last point is about the incorporation of art or other focal points, whether it is sheep, like this one, an art piece, whether it's benches and a place to sit, whether it's some other feature, but this all says, hey, this is an intentional planned landscape. This is something that we deliberately designed. It's not just been let go willy-nilly to kind of evolve the way, any old way. This is a purposefully maintained landscape that incorporates both lawn and native planting. The last point really is about, again, this shows edges. This is another example of the same thing. Here, this is a native grass. It's got a wildflower that's incorporated just for a little bit of a focal point for interest. Very clean lines, neat edges, and then these blocks of stone, which in this case serve as both a place to sit and as a foil for the aesthetically, artistically, a foil for the soft textures of the grasses. Also very deliberately designed. So the second thing I want to talk about is about journeys and how you move through the landscape, because it would be I think a mistake to assume that that in incorporating native plantings into a landscape, you then lose the ability to use it. And so here at Morris, as you know, that the journey is very picturesque. What you may not know is the original design sketch for this front meadow had a very straight road that went straight up the hill. And I think that it would be a much less interesting place if you just moved through it in a straight line. It's the ability to kind of wind your way through and enjoy it from several angles that is what makes, for me, part of what makes this place special. And so coming back to this slide, you can see the path winds you around, and as you move through it, you see it from different angles, different vistas, and you have a chance to enjoy it perhaps more fully than you would if you moved just straight up the hill. This is another example. This is from Bowman's Hill Wildflower Center near New Hope, and they've incorporated along their path a place to sit and pause and enjoy. This is their front meadow. This is a picture from England. What I really love about this one is the path is very wide, and it's not, in this case, an abrupt transition from a very short lawn to something a little taller, but very gradual. And you can see they have they've been able to retain, by doing that, they've been able to retain, in this case, the buttercups and what for England, what is their native wildflower. So when we talk about how we do it from a design exercise, from a design standpoint, we can also talk about kinds of grasses, because there's more than one way, again, to do this. If you look at your property and say, hey, this is a limited area, I'd like to try this out, there are different ways it can be done. And I'm going to show three kinds. This first kind's very sort of the lowest. This is a fine fescue lawn seeding. It is a lower maintenance lawn than traditional lawn. So you can see here, this is regular lawn that's been clipped. This is fine fescue, which has been allowed to grow a little taller. Fine fescue, it takes a couple years for it to fill in thickly, but once it's filled in, you can mow it on a very limited basis. Some people don't mow it at all. I think it looks best with a little bit of mowing, but you can see it has this slightly longer texture. By doing that, you can have the opportunity to have native wildflowers in the spring. This is again on a corner of the meadow at Morris Arboretum. Through the summer, this lawn is mown regularly. You wouldn't see it as any different from regular lawn. This is the native wildflower Spring Beauty, and by mowing it less in the spring, they are able to allow this Spring Beauty to continue to exist. You can't buy Spring Beauty in the store. It is a wildflower that occurs on old soils. You might be able to transplant it somewhere if there's a development site and you want to rescue it or salvage it and transplant it. But really, when you have it, you're very lucky, because you can't really redesign this in. You have to find it existing in the landscape and then allow it to remain. But I do the same thing in my front lawn with crocus. We're kind of lazy mowers. We mow it a little less frequently early spring, and we get all the crocus coming up through our lawn, beautiful purple display, and then we can, once its bloom is done, then we start our mowing. So that's the first level. Here's a second type. This is a cool season meadow, cool season lawn, that's been allowed to grow about this tall. This is at Pennypack Restoration Trust. You can see this is in early summer. It's got kind of the silvery seed heads. This is something that you see incorporated into properties very commonly around Princeton area. If you're driving to Princeton, you take the back roads. You'll see a lot of this on the large estate properties. Again, they mow it so it's set back from the road edge. It's given an apron of clipped, a neat edge of regular lawn. This is very easy to do in that the seeding is easy, the seed is relatively cheap, and you can mow it maybe 3 to 5 times a year once it's established, or more often. You can shape it.
What did you say the name was?
This is cool as a cool season grass. Some examples of cool season grass would be tall turf type fescue. Sometimes orchard grass is another component that sometimes goes in. Cool season grasses are a group of grasses that do all their growing in early spring and in fall. So people's lawns, the bluegrass that you have in your lawn is also a cool season grass. You're just mowing it to keep it very short. If you let that grow, it would look very much like this if you mowed it once a month or once every couple months. The plus side for this is it greens up fast in the spring. It's pretty easy to work with. It's very forgiving. If you want to change the mowing edges, it's very easy to do. The downside is that by midsummer, unless you're sort of mowing it on a 3 to 5 times a year schedule, the silvery seed heads turn kind of brown, and I think they're less pretty then. This, by contrast, is a warm season grass planting. This is a fairly uniform planting of, it looks like prairie dropseed. Warm season grasses do all their growing in the heat of the year. So early summer through fall is when they grow. They're not going to green up as early in spring, but they have other very lovely ornamental qualities. So here you see an area of warm season grass. This one is fairly short, doesn't grow any taller than this, and it's framed by regular lawn. So this has been done in an area which is lawn that's not being used very much in this case, in a ribbon. Here's another example. This is again from Pennypack Restoration Trust. This is multiple species. You can see one short species here. This is little blue stem, and then this is another. This is big blue stem that's popping up out of it. Here's the regular lawn. And in this case, they've got wildflowers coming up out of it. Black-eyed Susan. Highline. The highline has a lot of warm season grasses in its design. So the good thing about the warm season grasses is you get really dramatic fall color. And in the highline, you can see the golds, the reds, the kind of foxy tones are beautiful at this time of year. Here it is in winter. This is again the Pennypack Restoration Trust. Here's a ribbon of warm season grass. It's about this high. Here's where an area of lawn, cool season grass that they're mowing more regularly. It's kept short. And you can see this kind of lovely texture, almost a dried flower arrangement texture. So you can get winter interest. In addition to the evergreens that people normally think of, you can get winter interest. And so, as a designer, when I'm working with any native plants, I try to think about pattern. How can I combine them in ways that will provide interest year-round and that will keep them beautiful? This is an example from Bowman's Hill Wildflower Center. This is from November, October. You can see the warm season grasses. They were actually more gold than this picture captures, but the warm season grasses in the tans and the golds, and then the wildflowers coming up through it. And this texture is very deliberately created. Bowman's Hill started out, I believe their meadow starts out with cool season grasses. They let it grow a little longer, and then they've planted into it to get this kind of interest. Here's another one. This is from June. You can see the drifts of the wildflowers. This area is wetter. So this plant is beard tongue, Pedestemon digitalis, and it's blooming white in June, and it adds interest to the longer grass in this area. Here's another one from midsummer. This is also Bowman's Hill. That same meadow we saw 2 slides ago in November. This one. This one looks very different midsummer. Here you have orange butterfly weed, orange milkweed, very short, and maybe Queen Anne's lace, although I don't think so. Here's another one in the fall. This is along the List Picket. Very deliberate textures. Not that you want to use these everywhere, but accents of these help, are not only good for the environment, but placed well, they add more texture and interest to a landscape and help celebrate some of the colors and changes in the seasons. So, thank you. Do you have questions, comments, images you enjoyed seeing particularly that I can go back and pop them up on the screen?
How do you keep one species there without having all sorts of what you call, or we might call weeds? In other words, it looks very one species or two or three.
You have to establish them the right way. So if you take a piece of ground and you say, this area I want to have something that's a little taller, a little different, and you just let it grow, you're gonna get what comes up.
Right.
So I would say it is better to do a couple different things. You can take up the grass and put down your own seed, your own intentional seed or your own intentional live plants for the plants you want. And then the first 2 years are really key, that establishment year. Until once the plants fill in, if you pick them well and they're happy for the site, they'll be robust and they will tend to crowd out weeds. But when they're establishing, you want to go through and take out anything which is like a thistle, or a plant that you don't want. Let it all fill in so that the management is not more work, but it's more strategic.
I once tried daisies and clovers on my lawn,
Uh-huh.
and I got a letter from the neighbors
Yeah.
because it became terrible. I mean,
And
it's
so-
not daisies and clovers, everything else. too.
Right. So I think that the thing to do is to look at in the case of your lawn, is say, look at your lawn and let's start with a small area. I'm not gonna do it everywhere, because then it looks like I just decided not to mow for a while. Look at your lawn, pick a small area, keep mowing the rest of it, and pick a seed or plants that are gonna be beautiful, that are the height you want. You don't wanna pick anything too tall. You want the height you want. And then what I like to do is add other things like a bench, a bird feeder, some signage, things that tell people this is intentional, this is part of what our hopes for our landscape, part of our landscape design. It's not accidental. Yeah.
Would you speak a bit about why we want to avoid herbicides and
Sure.
pesticides? And in the areas you saw where they mowed the grass
Mhm.
to have a neat appearance, they don't use pesticides and herbicides there, do they?
I think only in a very targeted way.
What was the question, please?
Oh, the question is, how do you think about fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, and how do you maintain a lawn so that you don't need to have so many of them, even in the clipped lawn? So, and why is that an important issue? Is that fair? Yeah. So it's important because, remember when I talked about how the water that comes off our lawn feeds our ponds and streams? That's not only sediment, it's not only any pet waste or any dirt that loose material it might encounter. It also means that it picks up any chemicals it takes along the way. And so fertilizers are important because they are a source of food, if you like, for algae, and they are a source of impurity for the water that they flow into. And so where we have a lot of fertilizer, if you fertilize very heavily, you'll find that in the downstream, in the streams where that water flows, you are less likely to have a healthy fish community. The fish can't tolerate that level of impurity. You're more likely to have algae. You're more likely to have water quality problems. And so in sustainable lawn care, it's not that you never fertilize, but you use, I try to use organic sources, compost, fertilizer sources which are less likely to travel downstream, and you try to do it at the right time of year spring and fall, a little bit of compost on a lawn to feed it when it's actively growing, but you don't wanna fertilize, say, midsummer when the lawn isn't growing as actively. That's just wasted, that's just gonna flow off. And I think I'd say keeping an intelligent eye on any landscape you're maintaining. If there's a problem, then you can address that problem, but you don't need to preemptively, for most lawns, apply chemicals and fertilizers everywhere at high rates. That's just money out of your pocket for material that's in excess of what you need, and it doesn't do the environment downstream any good either. Yeah.
My villa is affected by this.
Uh-huh.
I want to ask you about the incidence of deer ticks,
Uh-huh.
Lyme disease,
Sure.
and the fact that the young grandchildren can't play in the tall grass.
So, yeah, and that's an important question, because I have small children myself, and I worry about them. I think there are a couple things. He's asked about ticks and Lyme disease and how they may be affected by taller grasses. So I'd say a couple things. The first is, I always, in terms of the view, I always mow an area around my house, because I think that makes the tall grasses look more beautiful with the frame. I think that you then also put in native plants by having tall grasses not just be any grass, but be native plants. You're more likely to have the kinds of natural predators that will reduce the incidence of ticks. So the reason we have so many ticks is because we have a lot of mice, and we have a lot of deer, and we don't have as many hawks and other wildlife that keep those populations under control. So that's the second point. And the third point is you can get ticks anywhere in this area. You don't have to walk in a tall grass to get them. You can pick them up anywhere. So I always check my kids. Anytime they've been playing outside, I always check them. I always check my dog. That's just part of living in this area. Yeah.
It is possible to pick a very small area,
Mm-hmm.
far away from any villa as possible, to have an experimental area.
Absolutely.
Without doing the entire park.
No, and I would never advocate for doing an entire area. If you remember, I think it's important to balance lawn and other native plants, so that you have the lawn as a frame, so that you can use the lawn for things that you honestly use it for. If you walk your dog, if you want to go out and play a game of catch with the grandkids, or with family members who come, you can do all that. You should be able to plan to do all that. But for the areas that are seasonally wet, they're less comfortable to walk on because the grass is soggy. If it's an area to the side that you're really not using much, that's where you do the taller grasses. You can have both. You can have both. You should have both. It shouldn't be one or the other. You shouldn't have to choose. Yeah.
I've been very disappointed with our pond area. It doesn't look nice at all, and we do have algae in the pond.
Right.
I'm wondering how we can improve that and make sure when we do what we're thinking of doing, that we don't create what we've done at the pond.
Right. So the reason the pond has algae is because it's got really high nutrient levels, which is like fertilizer and other things are coming off that. So adding in strategically, not in the places where you play, but in secondary areas, on steeper slopes, in low areas, adding natural vegetation will help filter that water before it reaches the pond. So it'll help alleviate the tendency to grow algae. The second thing that you can do is you can plant trees around your pond, because the shade from the trees will help keep the water cool, and cooler water is going to be less prone to an algae bloom. And the third thing is to have a plan going in, so that rather than just let grass grow long everywhere, which I agree would not be appropriate, picking an area, outlining it, looking at where it's going to have the most effect for your soaking up your stormwater, for filtering your stormwater, and then having a plan for how to seed it, and having a plan for how to maintain it the first few years while it gets established. Those are all key things to making sure it looks its best. Yeah.
what are some plants other than grasses that can be useful in absorbing water and being attractive? Interplay them with the grasses.
Well, yeah, what I do is I
You
think
better
of,
repeat the question.
okay, sorry, you're right, Ann, thanks. Ann's asking, what are some plants besides grasses that you can use to be able to soak up storm water, be able to have a healthy environment, but not just grass. The reason I think about grasses is because I think of them as the backbone. If you want something short, they are going to knit together really tightly to help exclude the weeds that you don't want. But yes, absolutely, you can definitely use other plants. And you can do a couple different categories. You can look at trees. You can definitely plant more shade trees to help frame views and help help support your park-like campus, park-like property. And they will also help do the things we've talked about. You can use other native flowering plants, wildflowers. And there are many you can use. If you like the daisy-like flowers, like the you can plant things like coreopsis.
Other than flowers.
Other than flowers. Native trees, native shrubs.
What are they?
Native shrubs, it depends on how wet it is. If it's fairly dry, there is a low-grow dwarf sumac, which is easy to grow. If the soil is acid, there are some there are like low-growing blueberries. It really depends if it's wetter. Clethra is lovely. There are some dwarf red-twig dogwoods, which are native. There are non-native ones, but there's also native ones, which all grow low. It really depends. There's low-grow hollies, which are deciduous, which has the red berries for winter, which look pretty against like a wood's edge or against taller grasses. That's a deciduous holly.
Is that winterberry?
Winterberry, yeah, sorry, I'm blanking on the common name. So, there are many choices. So it really depends, for me, the question is, how high do you want it to get? Do you want it to be really short? Do you want it to be tall? And what's most important to you? Is it most important to have winter color? Is it most important to have fall color? Is it most important to have flowers? We can pick one that fits the bill. Yeah.
Yes, you've shown us very large areas where
Uh-huh.
they've cut the grass and then let the natural thing. I think it's very effective. I've seen it in Valley Forge. However, we're not such a big campus
Right.
that we can allow so much overgrowth. It
Right.
seems that we need a more controlled environment,
Yeah.
which I don't think will affect the environment that much.
Well, it all helps. It all does help. So I would say is, walk your property, look at areas which are receiving water now, which maybe you're not using so heavily. Look at how they can be used. I think of them as thin ribbons. Look at how you can get thin ribbons of areas that will be framed by the grasses and which will enhance the setting that you have. So they don't have to be big. I would actually advocate for starting small, starting with a sample area, because then you can take a look at it and you can decide what's working well for you, how you want to adjust it, and you can then grow it, make it bigger to best fit how your
We
property
faced
works.
the recreation area,
Uh-huh.
and we looked out at this spring and we couldn't understand what was going on out there. And I do think that was crabgrass.
Mhm.
And I just wondered about control for things like that. I think walking on crabgrass for old people is not really readily good.
Yeah. Well, there's several good resources for organic lawn care that I can send to Ann or other people here may be aware of, but usually caring for lawns has to happen at the right season, as is true for any other plant. And lawns grow spring and fall, so fall is the time when you add new seed to a lawn to thicken it up, when you add maybe some compost, which is a natural and environmentally friendly way of feeding the lawn without pollution, and that will bear fruit for you, so to speak, in the following spring. There's also for crabgrass, corn gluten meal is an organic product which will inhibit crabgrass germination, inhibit the new sprouts, but you have to put it on early in the spring when the forsythia are blooming, so that it can prevent it from sprouting. Once you see the crabgrass, you've missed that cycle for the year, so you have to do it early. Yeah.
I want to ask a question, and I guess it's a question for Ann. I really thought that this was going to be an explanation of the plan for Beaumont. At what point will we have an idea of what that looks like, Ann?
There is no plan at present. We're exploring possibilities with you, and we would welcome your ideas of what that plan should be. We are educating ourselves.
Okay.
Yes.
When we moved into Beaumont in 2010,
Uh-huh.
we have a villa, small front lawn, no back lawn, just a terrace. I counted, I think, 19 species of birds that came to my feeder were on our tiny little plot. And since then, we started spraying with, I don't know what is in it, but I'm down to almost no birds. I have 5 types of nesting birds. I think I've had a couple of little
there isn't any.
arrows, and that's it. There is nothing in the lawn
I'll
to eat.
show you,
I'm
yes.
also a gardener. There are no worms, there are no
Lightning bugs,
damp
no
bugs,
lightning.
there are no big ants, there is nothing for them to eat.
And
So
people
therefore,
here-
we have no birds. Now, when I was a child, my father put something called espoma, which is an organic, high in nitrogen fertilizer on our lawns in the springtime and again in the fall. And we had the most luscious, wonderful lawn. Sure, we had some crabgrass, but a healthy lawn will kind of help get rid of that, or you just mow it, and it's, you know, you really don't notice it. If you feed the lawn, the grass will grow and be healthy, and you don't need all these poison sprays. And you can just see the result of what's happened on this campus, and I won't allow the spray to be used. It doesn't do much good.
There's some very interesting research being done on or other organic ways to support lawns in lieu of chemical fertilizers. The fertilizers you buy at the large supply stores are salt-based. They're usually, you got urea or something similar and they're a salt-based, chemically manufactured, artificially manufactured fertilizer. And my understanding from scientists who do studies on soil food webs is that those salt-based fertilizers kill off, they're salt, they kill off the microbial populations that are native to the soil. And the way they've described it to me is that those are sort of like having your lawn on drugs. Once you start using those, you kill off the native microbial population, and then you have to keep adding those chemical fertilizers to feed the lawn. If you can instead use organic fertilizers, like the kind you were talking about, compost, other natural materials, that those feed the lawn naturally, they work with the microbial populations, and then the plants actually have, the roots of the plants have a symbiotic relationship with those soil organisms to be able to get them the food they need when they want it. And when that soil population is healthy, your lawn or agricultural food crop will also be healthy. It'll be more resistant to disease, and you won't have to keep spending money to buy artificial stuff to put on it. And it's a matter of rebalancing. And so those researchers are really looking to compost teas, which is compost that's been water that's had compost put into it and been aerated to make like a brown kind of tea that they put on the lawn. But I think using regular compost will do, from a good source, will do many of the same things for you. It's interesting that you mentioned the story about the fireflies, because I talked to a lady who was advocating for some of the same topics we've been talking about today. And her personal story was she bought a property in New Jersey, and when she first moved, she loved it. She had birds, she had fireflies, and she remembers the fireflies on a summer's evening rising out of the grass in this twinkling mass. And she said, she was new, she bought the house, she wanted to do the right thing, so she started using, the 30-30-30, bagged weed and feed type lawn products, and started spraying it, and she noticed in 5 years she had no more fireflies. They were gone. The firefly, and whether it's fireflies, whether it's butterfly, the ability to catch a butterfly in a jar, those all depend on more gentler, organic ways of maintaining our yards, and an ability to have thin ribbons, selected areas of native plants that can support them. And it's not that we have to choose to do all one or do all the other. I believe we can have both. We just have to do it in a thoughtful way. Yeah.
I'm Nell McCrae. I live at number 74, Villa 74, which is the top of the park. So my vista is wonderful, and anybody who wants to see what this lovely lawn looks like, what our beautiful trees look like, we have dawn redwood, we have a willow oak, we have a weeping beech, and we have beautiful katsura trees. We have the big trees. I'm addressing the issue to answer Ann of what do I propose with others that I've spoken to who own villas, what would they like to see? We would like to see the grass maintained in a more environmentally green manner. But we do not wish to see the grass removed. We propose that you could have some of the beds in the area where the grass does not grow, that you could have plants that don't mind wet feet in those areas. You also could have a path that would lead from Pond Lane up to Middle Road that might be a little curving path that would be very attractive in that area. The purpose of the park, we walk it, we walk our dogs in it, we look at it, it gives us a sense of peace and serenity. I don't want to lose that green grass.
Of course not.
I feel very strongly about that, and so do many others. So develop a very small area where the grass doesn't grow and treat the grass environmentally. Also, the marketing committee knows that the big lawn that is out there is very important to our financial stability in selling the properties that are here. We have this beautiful green area with beautiful majestic trees there. So we feel very strongly that we don't want to lose that lovely area. But I agree with Ann that we want to do it in a more environmentally sound way, and as many people have spoken, that is an issue. And to be perfectly honest, to create more flower beds at Beaumont with the current grounds budget is not in our best interest. The grounds committee couldn't even handle what we planted in our courtyard. The weeds were there, it wasn't watered properly. I think we need to work to increase the grounds budget, and that is another issue, right? Right. So I just wanted to address those issues. And there is a health issue that is a problem to some of us. The tall area around the pond, which John alluded to, is weeds. It's got ragweed. I can't even go there. I have terrible allergies and I can't go there.
And some of us have asthma, which is aggravated by allergies, which is where I am.
So we need to address that issue. I think the Green Committee needs to address the issue of what is creating the grasses that are producing allergies for those of us. But I thank you, Laura, for the presentation and for having the meeting.
It's a committee, it isn't me.
Well, you're head of the committee, the chairman, I can't name them all. I mean, Dee Dee's on it, and John's on it, Margaret's is on it, I didn't know who was on it. But the Nature Conservancy I called, and I give it to you because there's the number. I have a printout of what they will even tell you of what to use as less toxic materials on the grass, and I'm sure Laura can give you that information as well. But that's where the majority of the villa owners would like to have it go. Thank you.
Yeah.
What impact, if any, does the letting the grass grow have on the need for the application of pesticides?
It reduces it in the sense that you're going to have something which weaves together so it, and helps lock out weeds you don't want. You can control them more through mowing. You don't have to say put down the crabgrass control. And it is less mowing, so it's less time that you're paying somebody to go through and spend time pushing the mower. It does mean that what I do when I'm maintaining, say, a taller area, is I go through once a year and I look for anything which I think might be a problem and pull it. And if I can hand pull it and have it gone, it's done. Once in a while, I find something which is difficult to remove by hand pulling, and I will apply chemical to an area about that big to kill it, so I don't have to worry about it again, but it's very targeted. Yeah, so it reduces.
May I remind you
It's
that
just a
this
matter of strategy.
will be available as a video if you want to see it again, or you know someone who would like to see it. I don't know yet when that will be. Excuse me. So, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Another question.